And I'd like to welcome you to the very first IORMA webinar on the subject of immersive technologies. I'm delighted to be hosting this event, and we're going to start by just sharing a little bit of information about ourselves individually, and I'll do this in the form of some presentation slides. So this is me. I'm David Wortley. I'm a CEO and founder of 360 and 360 Immersive Experiences. I'm also a member of the advisory board of IORMA. I've been working with webinars and virtual conferences, web conferencing for about 20 years, but this is my first webinar for a couple of years, so I may be a little bit ring rusty. But just to tell you a little bit about what I do, my interests are primarily in 360-degree images and videos. So in other words, taking photographs and videos of real-world environments in 360 degrees, which the way I describe it, provides opportunities to help people to travel through space and time. I'm a Google Street View Trusted Pro with over 21,000 published images, and these images have been viewed 82 million times in total, and the kind of images and videos that I capture can be used for multiple applications. I'm also involved in the creation of virtual tours and events, and the image that you see on the screen there is a screenshot from Guijian International General Hospital when they had their launch event back in October. Fortunately, I travelled through Wuhan before the coronavirus situation happened, so I wasn't a victim of it. So that is me. I'm going to invite each of the presenters in turn now to share their experiences. And I'm going to start with Ross Edwards. Ross is he's the Director of Immersive Technologies at IORMA. And he supplied me with this graphic to show some of his commercial interests involved with immersive technologies. So what I'm going to do now is to unmute Ross and spotlight him and ask him to say something about himself.
Hi. Yes, as I say, my name is Ross Edwards, and as well as being Immersive Technologies Director, I am one of the co-founders of ImageScope Productions. We've got a background in CGI feature films. So that has led us quite naturally to doing digital environments for VR projects. We've got a number of VR projects on the go at the moment. We've got one which is a TV series, and also we've worked on a project with exposure therapists, helping people showing signs of PTSD from car accidents. We've also got another project with a forest in France to do a flyover with that. Yeah, one of our aims is looking at optimization of virtual reality using gaming engines, and just seeing what is the highest quality we can get out of that for virtual reality projects.
Okay, thank you very much, Ross. I'm now going to go back to sharing screens, and I'm going to introduce James Watson. James is the marketing director at a company called Immerse. They have a very prestigious client base, and this is shows you the logos of some of the clients that they work with. He'll tell you in more detail about what he does and what Immerse do. And in particular, he's going to tell you a little bit about their virtual enterprise platform. So I'm going to now unmute James and hand over to you.
Thanks very much, David. Yes, as David says, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Immerse. We have been in the immersive technology space for past nearly 5 years now, when the first sort of half-decent virtual reality headset came out in the Oculus DK1. That's when we saw the opportunity. Before that, we were kind of desk-based learning and development. So you could argue it was a natural progression to move into virtual reality, although back then it was quite a bold move. We were very early to the market, which is now looking like a amazing visionary decision. But over a period of 4 years, there have been some times where we were probably thinking perhaps we were too far ahead. But we've spent the last 4 years, in effect, developing a platform which enables large organizations to do a number of things. In effect, it's, you know, the way simplistic you look at it, it helps them operationalize virtual reality content. Specifically at the moment, training, because training is the best understood and clearest sort of use case of virtual reality from a sort of enterprise perspective. And our platform enables the companies such as Shell, DHL. We've got a good project also with GE Healthcare, which fits, David, a little bit with some of your photography out in Wuhan of the MRI scanner. And we enable companies to either create content using our platform or take existing content and then use the platform, in effect, to deploy their content, to scale it across a large organization, and most importantly, to measure it. So the way I look at it is, you know, we have a platform that really takes virtual reality content from being kind of an outlier piece of content that might sit outside a large organization's learning ecosystem, and you can actually bring it into the ecosystem. You can integrate our platform with a learning management system or other systems, and suddenly you have something that is far more operationally sound and easy to measure. So we've done that for, as I said, Shell, for GE Healthcare, DHL. We've got a number of other large clients in progress that I can't specifically name check, but it's a very interesting time to be in the immersive technology space, and it's moving very quickly, and it's very exciting.
Okay, thank you very much for that, James. So we're now going to move on to our next presenter. Is Steve Dunn. Steve has a number of different hats on. He's probably one of the most qualified people of all our panelists in terms of the work that he's done with virtual and augmented reality. He's a co-founder of a company called Medical Realities with a famous virtual surgeon, Shafi Ahmed. So when it comes to medical application, Steve has got an awful lot to be able to share with us. So I'm now going to ask Steve to talk about himself.
Great. Thank you, David. Very nice introduction. I've been in immersive and augmented space for quite a long time now. It started off with augmented reality about 12 years ago, and virtual reality about 8 years ago. I have a couple of companies in that space, Amplified Robot, but more importantly, medical realities. And medical realities, I started off with Professor Shafi Ahmed, who's a renowned virtual surgeon. And we actually use immersive technology to train and educate medical students, but also healthcare professionals all around the world. It's an exciting time to be in this area. And we're seeing a huge growth. We've been doing it now in medical realities for over 3.5 years, but right now it's just beginning to take off in a big way. So that's all I have to say about medical realities, except it's an exciting area to be in. Immersive technology is certainly part of the future for everybody.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Steve. Going back to our presentation, our next presenter is, he's one of the most renowned futurists that I know of. He's the CEO and founder of Fast Future. Known Rohit for a number of years, and he really has pioneered and really brought out the profile of being a futurist and the impact of technology on the future of business and society. Just to give you a little bit of a heads up on one of the events that Rohit is involved in organising, which is Fast Futures London Futures Week, due in July. I will be showing this screen again at the end of the presentation, just to remind you. But for those of you who are interested in coming along to this event, it's going to be a very worthwhile use of your time. So I'm now going to unmute Rohit and ask him to tell us about himself. So.
Hi, well, I think David's already been very generous in explaining who I am. David was actually very kind enough to be a contributor to our first book on the future of business. I'm a global futurist. I work with clients around the world, virtually right now, helping them think about what are the forces and factors that could shape the future, and how do you create strategies to both respond to what might be coming, but also to create your own preferred future. And we do that through a mixture of speaking, executive education, research, consultancy, and publishing. And one of the areas that people are getting very excited about at the moment is this whole area of immersive technologies, and how do we use them to enhance the way we teach internally, and we accelerate our learning. How do we use it to engage customers in different ways? And how do we create new experiences that we've never imagined before? So we've been doing quite a lot of work with the likes of Aruba and Huawei, talking about, in particular, 5G, and how that enables different possible immersive experiences in the future with these technologies, whether it's in a football stadium or a live concert or a number of other settings. And so we've published various bits of research on that. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say on this panel.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Rohit. So we're now going to go into the question time, and we'll have a look at our first question. And the first question that we have for our panelists is about what the definition of immersive technologies is. So to answer this, I'm going to ask Ross. I'm going to unmute him and ask him, so what's your definition of immersive technologies, Ross?
Well, I think it's any immersive technology that helps extend, well, it extends or creates new realities for you. And also looking at sort of haptics as well, in that it can be all your senses that it can experience. Particularly regarding sort of virtual reality, I think it's when your peripheral vision is involved in that, rather than just seeing a 2D screen. I think it's a very powerful space for, say, training or learning different things. Yeah, I think it is because the peripheral vision occurs outside the point of fixation, which is your normal straight vision. I think it brings a lot of power to that environment. So I think that would be my take on it, really.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. I guess the question that I have is, do we actually need technology to become immersive? You know, I mean, there's an argument that would say that books are a form of immersive technology, radio and cinema are a form of immersive technology, because they create environments in which people can immerse themselves and become totally engaged. So what contribution does today's technology make to immersion? James, can I bring you in and ask you for your views on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's probably a distinction there with what you're talking about, David, from, you know, immersing yourself through any different kind of mean. And yes, you could find a book incredibly immersive. Mentally, that's very immersive. You imagine the characters, you imagine the scenes, you know, and often that's arguably more immersive than when you're sitting and watching a film, because you're not having to do the thinking. So I think there's different levels. That a book is certainly not technology. It's certainly a way to immerse yourself mentally in a different world. But I think the distinction there being, when you have technology to, I would say, enhance levels of immersion. If you are, particularly, my field being VR, yes, you are completely immersed, you are completely focused, you're completely, completely bought into that environment. And it's very powerful because of that, particularly in a training environment, because you are absolutely 100% focused. You're not getting distracted by text. You're not getting a colleague offering you a nice cup of tea whilst you're midway through a training exercise. You are completely and utterly bought into that environment. So, do you need technology for immersion? No, but are there certain things that through technology make them more effective, more immersive, more impactful? Then absolutely. So, there's a differentiator there. It's not, technology doesn't have, the sole rights to immersion, absolutely not. But there are certain things, be that VR, AR, MR, that do heighten the level of immersion.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So essentially, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that the technology can enable a sense of immersion, particularly if you've got something like a virtual reality headset on, then that actually enhances or almost forces you to become in an immersive environment. I'm going to bring in Steve now and ask for his thoughts on that.
Yes, I think virtual reality, especially immersion in virtual reality, can be total immersion in a way, because it's not only visual, but it's also sound and it's also tactile as well. So that by using all those things, one can actually sort of create something which is indistinguishable from the real thing. And by creating that and by teaching people in immersive technology where you can have a lot of interactivity, that really helps in the education process, and also the learning process, and actually feeling part of what's going on. We live in a three-dimensional world. We should be taught and educated in 3 dimensions as well, I think.
Okay, so essentially, it really enhances many of the practices that we have in everyday life. I'm just going to bring in Rohit now and ask him if he would like to make any comments about that.
Sorry, I was just answering a question from one of your participants. I think I've heard, what everyone said is great. I think the reality here is that we can create incredible experiences around education, around entertainment, around how you build dialogue between communities and how you create shared experiences, so you don't have to leave your desktop, but you can be in a shared experience visiting a new factory location with your colleagues from all around the world, but never have to be there. Also, once we start to build in AI, and in the same way as in gaming environments, you have the environments generate themselves, we can start to create virtual worlds that actually use AI to generate themselves. So the immersive experience unfolds in a different way for each participant. So I think there's some very exciting things we can do there. The question is always going to be, how do we make it accessible in a cheap and easily deliverable format? How do we make it accessible to the mass market? And how do we convince people that they want to use this? And is that going to be something they buy separately, or is it something that just gets embedded in their device and is another app on their device they start to access? So there's some very interesting questions open up when we start to see the kind of true potential unfold of the technologies.
Mm. Yes, I think you make some good points there, and we'll have a chance to discuss those in a bit more detail when we look at the role of AI and other technologies in the process. I'm now going to go back to Steve again and ask him if he could help us with explaining what the difference between VR, AR and MR is.
Thanks, David. I'll try. I'll start off with the easy bit first, which is VR, or virtual reality. That's where I asked you to put on a head-mounted display some goggles, in which I just take over everything that you can see. So virtual reality, I'm actually transposing your real world into a totally virtual world. You can't see anything else. You possibly can't hear anything else as well. So you're totally involved and totally immersed in what's going on. Slightly contentious when we get on to AR and augmented reality and MR and mixed reality. Augmented reality essentially is where I ask you to look at the real world, and that could be asking you to look through your smartphone, your tablet, or a visor like the HoloLens or Magic Leap. You're still looking at the real world, but I'm overlaying images. It could be animations or graphics, but the word is overlay. So that's augmented reality. You can actually manipulate those images around, but they're overlaid onto the real world view that you can see. Now, mixed reality is in actual fact mashing the two things together, where what I'm actually adding to the real world view is in fact looks as though it's totally integrated into that view. So it's not just an overlay, it actually can be something which could look as though it's actually integrated with inside the view you're seeing. So if something should be behind something else in what you're looking at, it will appear occluded and behind that, what you're watching. So that's the real differences between everything. Virtual reality is where everything you see is, you're totally immersed in it, you can't see anything else. Augmented reality is where you can see the real world, but there's an overlay or overlays onto that real world. And mixed reality is trying to make it indistinguishable by adding new things into the real world environment. And again, that could be animations or anything that you want to do. So those are the real differences between VR, AR, and mixed reality.
We'll move on to the next question, and that is, what immersive technologies do you use or develop within your own organisation? So now I'm going to hand over to James and ask him to talk about what you do in Immerse.
Thanks. So, I mean, I've talked a little bit about it previously. I mean, we're solely focused on virtual reality, and that is not to say there isn't huge value across particularly augmented reality in the sort of training space as well. But ultimately, it's about doing something as best as you can and not trying to do any number of different technologies. So we focus on virtual reality, and I think interesting. There's a role for both within training. You have virtual reality, as Steve was saying, you are completely closed off in a virtual world and your focus is very high. You can pretty much do anything. You can recreate an oil rig, you can recreate an MRI scanner room, you can do whatever you want, and you can create whatever scenario you want in that. So that is hugely powerful, where you want to put someone in an environment where they have to be solely focused on that and doing whatever training. But then augmented reality has a great impact as well. But for augmented reality, the key thing there is you need the real world. That's, if you really want to differentiate VR and AR or MR, you need the real world for AR and MR. You need something to overlay onto, and that invariably would be, a real environment, whereas VR, create whatever you want. So I think that's an interesting distinction to look at. But I mean, so if you want to be, for example, training someone on the job, they're a recent starter and they have a big piece of machinery that they need to work with, well, that's perfect. If you're able to bring in some sort of augmented reality headset and overlay data onto that machine, brilliant. That's really good. But if you want to train that person from zero knowledge, you probably don't want to have them out on the factory floor looking at an expensive piece of kit that you potentially have to take offline in order to train them on. And there is always the question they do something wrong. So you take that piece of kit, you create it in virtual reality, they can do whatever they want with it, they can repeat the training as often they want, it's all measured, every action is then reported. So, that's an interesting distinction. They have complementary roles to play, and we've decided to focus on that virtual reality piece pretty much at the front end. And it gives you a huge amount of scope. As I said, we have customers come to us, big global organizations, say, well, what scenarios can you create and what can you measure? You can create anything. You can create a once in 20-year incident to train someone on. You know, you can blow things up. You can, you know, put people in situations that, you know, that once in 20 years where they may experience it, they can have gone through that 20 times. You know, it isn't the real world, but, you know, as was mentioned previously with haptics and other sensory elements, it's real enough. It's real enough to stress test people. So, you know, from that perspective, it's very, very powerful. I think Steve mentioned earlier about it's an exciting time to be in immersive technology, because the market does now understand the power of all the different sort of technologies within immersive technology. And so they're really looking very hard at these technologies. And there's definitely been, I joined Immerse just over a year ago, and in that time, I've seen the market shift. When I first joined, it was a little bit difficult for us to be talking about platform and scale and measurement, because a lot of people were still thinking, I'm not really sure this VR technology is going to stick around. You know, it may just be a little bit of a fad. Is it 3D TV type thing? And will it stick around? Those conversations have shifted, you know, and I'm sure, you know, Rohit, Ross and Steve as well, you get a sense for the market hasn't matured, but the market is starting to understand more what the technology can do, which really has meant, from our perspective, haven't, as I said, been a little too far out front for a while. We're seeing there's a move away from why should I consider these technologies to how do I use them? How do I implement them? How do I measure them? Which are all the kind of conversations that very much fit with what our proposition is. So, you know, it's a good time to be in that space and to be having those discussions with, you know, some of these big organizations who are considering it very seriously now.
Yeah, so when you're looking at the kind of technologies that your clients need to use, you're primarily talking about, as far as Immerse are concerned, you're primarily talking about virtual reality headsets to get the full value from the experience. But it's also, I believe that it's possible that a lot of your applications can be accessed on a desktop computer, so you can have mixed environments. I'm going to go over to Steve now, because I want to ask Steve a little bit about the work that Shafi Ahmed does and his use of virtual reality. Perhaps you'd like to tell us you know, a little bit about Shafi and some of the operations that he's performed. Well, in reality or virtual reality, how would you describe it?
Yes, in actual fact, one of the best things that happened in the last 2 years was my actually sort of meeting Shafi. He and I actually got together at a conference to Google Campus, and I'd seen he'd been actually experimenting with Google Glass. I don't know if everybody remembers the ill-fated Google Glass, because part of his job was that he was a training surgeon. He had 300 students under his wing at the Royal London Hospital, but he could only actually teach almost on a one-to-one basis. He could only have 2 students actually attend any of his operations that he was doing. And we were trying to devise a way about how we could use new technology and immersive technology. I've been working in virtual reality, and suggested that we actually start to initially film some of his operations in 360 and then show them to the students using the new head-mounted displays that were coming out. And I have to say that all 300 students were just blown away by what they saw and how they could actually hear what was going on, but actually see what was going on properly for the first time. And of course, one of the things in training and education especially is how do you scale these things? And Shafi's always been interested about how you can scale things, how he can actually share his knowledge and his teaching with as many people as possible. And to that end, we've actually sort of done live streaming of his operations. where we've interacted with students from around the world. I think the top range that we've got to so far is that we've had 55,000 people around the world actually watching one of his live operations. So we're continually looking for ways in which, and Shafi's continually looking for ways in which he can use these new types of technology to expand what he does, but also to enable to help other people, not only in this country and around the world, actually get part of his knowledge. We're doing it mainly in virtual reality now. We're adding simulations into it so that students and surgeons can actually try out certain techniques as well without actually getting near a real patient. It's interesting that pilots have been working with simulation for a long time, and pilots have to take 6 simulation courses per year. But in something like surgery, for instance, surgeons aren't required to take any more courses after they've actually graduated and got to consultant basis. We actually want to get everybody involved so they can keep on learning, keep on understanding about the new things that are happening in surgery and medicine as a whole. And virtual reality is a fantastic way of actually capturing this, and also being able to scale it up and make it available to everybody. We want to democratize medical training and education, and that's one of the things that Shafi is really enthusiastic about. We're now experimenting using AR as well. AR can be very useful when you want to do collaborative work, especially collaborative work with people who are not in the same hospital as you, perhaps not even in the same city or not even in the same country, but from around the world. And that's proving sort of very interesting. And in fact, there's just been a new thing we've been doing with a company in America, which is testing out this possibility of collaboration using AR. So we've got virtual reality for training and education, and disseminating the training and education all around the world, and taking it to people rather than people having to come to a training center or to a hospital or to university. They can actually be trained and educated wherever they are. So this is the type of thing that both Shafi and I are really interested in promoting. And we see that immersive technology, as it gets better, one of the barriers up until now, yes, I said that the pain of some of the other panelists and James, of in actual fact, were we too early into the market in virtual reality? But I think that you have to get in at some time and actually, plant your flag in the ground and make a statement. And we're now actually seeing people sort of catching on to how good and useful this can be. It's an amalgamation of, is the software getting better and is the hardware getting better? And the answer is yes. And as they keep on getting better, then we're going to get more and more people interested in what we're doing and what everybody else is doing in immersive technology.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Steve. I'm now going to go over to Rohit, and I'm going to ask Rohit about some of the other disruptive technologies that are becoming relevant to immersive technologies, technologies like AI and chatbots. You did kind of allude to the ability of AI to create environments and maybe even create personalized immersive environments for different people. Would you like to share some of your thoughts on how these technologies are going to impact in the future?
Yeah, I think we're going to see it impact in a number of ways. The first is for the developers themselves, that as we build up a bigger and bigger body of knowledge, the developers, about how to do certain things, how to render environments, how to create certain effects, how to deliver different types of experiences, whether you're teaching a mechanic, how to replace a head gasket, or a surgeon about how to hold a particular tool when doing an operation. We can do an awful lot of learning about hand movements, about all those sorts of things, about the physical mechanics of the human body in these situations, the behavior of other people in these situations, which can then be turned into assets, using machine learning that you can then draw on and use and accelerate your development. So you could start to see the development of augmented and virtual reality really increasingly becoming a process of assembling lots of different assets for lots of different features that you want to create in your environment, a bit like you see now with modern software development. So that's one thing. The tools will start to help us develop more. Secondly, we'll start to see AI being used within the environments, as I suggested, so that you'll be dynamically generating more and more of the experience. We'll be able to monitor, for example, what we look at, what we engage with as an individual, and start to realize that there's maybe 60% of the virtual environment that I'm not exploring. But where do I focus my attention? Where do I get interested? Where do I interact? And then using that to adapt what's created for me and what's rendered for me. Or where do I seem to hesitate more? Using just behavioral monitoring. As a doctor, again, going in to do an operation, where is it I seem most hesitant to take the next step? And then using the understanding of my behavior to bring in additional content. This is, okay, you always seem to hesitate at this point, or you're hesitating at this point. Maybe it's making an incision, maybe it's about suturing technique. Let us give you something else that's almost like a video inserted into that, because we think this is an area you have a learning issue with, so that we can overlay additional content for you. And so AI really starting to understand our behavior. When we get to the point where we've got AIs that are really managing our lives on our devices, understanding our behavior, making choices, communicating, buying, doing all that kind of stuff, then you could have our personal AI interacting with the AI in the VR environment or the AR environment, or mixed reality environment, and actually communicating behind the scenes about our needs, our interests, our preferences. And so without me even saying it, you might start to see members of my family being rendered into the environment, or food that I like being shown in that environment, doing things that make it more and more comfortable for me. Now, partly that could be just to make gaming more fun. It could be made to make entertainment more fun. But where I think this is going to be really, really important is in recovery situations for people who, have had an accident, or children who are suffering from some sort of learning disability. The more we can put people at their ease, the more we can put things that are familiar to them back into the environment where they're learning and rehabilitating, the faster the rehabilitation can be. And that's very hard to get from the individual, for them to say, here are all the things you can put into my environment. But actually, if we've got an AI that knows us, it can start to communicate that to the devices we're working with. Now, this isn't going to happen this year or next year, but within about 3 years, you'll start to see enough of the technology in our phones acting like that personal AI and being able to communicate certain things to other applications. And then it's whether the app developers can tap into that and use it to create these hyper-personalized environments within AR, VR, or mixed reality.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yes, one of the things that I've come across recently that I'm particularly interested in this space is to do with conditions like dementia and stress management. You can imagine scenarios where people are wearing a virtual reality headset and they're immersed. Say, if you're suffering from stress, they're immersed in a relaxing environment with nice, pleasant sounds, and you can see how, if you've got wearable devices that measure your pulse rate, your level of stress, your blood pressure, and feed that back into the experience can be modified so you have the most relaxing environment that is personalized to you. I just before I move on to Ross again, I'll just bring in James again and just ask him, because I know that some of your applications, one of the main strengths of them is that you can monitor people's actions, and as Rohit was saying there, you can understand where they're struggling with learning activities. Do you want to just say a few things about that?
Yeah. And actually, just to pick up on Rohit's point there around that the eye tracking piece. I mean that, that exists now. Some of the headsets, you have the ability within the VR environment to track exactly, you know, not only what they're doing but where they're looking, which is hugely powerful, as you say. I think what will really unlock the potential there is, and it's a much overused and referred to term, but 5G, because what you will be able to do then, as you mentioned, Rohit, is, you know, based on how someone is reacting in that environment, where they're looking, what they've done, you can suddenly tailor that environment to exactly, you know, what is going to work for them. So what you might find is a trainee might be looking in a certain direction and missing a key cue. Okay, well, based on that, therefore, the next stage, you may change things around so that that cue is in a different place or is highlighted in a different way. And then what you might learn from that is, okay, this person's more of a visual person, or this person is more based around sound, or, you know, you start to understand that individual better. So, you know, the ability to change those environments is somewhat dependent on processing power, and therefore, you know, 5G unlocks it. So I think that's an interesting point to talk about. And what you can do is then measure everything. Literally, within a virtual environment, we track 30 data points per second per user, which is a vast amount of data. It actually can be sort of scare people almost. But in effect, you decide what is of value to you, what you want to extract, what outcomes you take from that. You know, is it a question of someone completing points 1 through to 8 in a certain amount of time? That means success, or is it they need to achieve 3 out of 4 of those milestones? You can interpret it in however you want, but that data is incredibly powerful. And so the ability to track, the ability to therefore, you know, start demonstrating return on investment, start demonstrating the efficacy of these, you know, that is the key. I think, you know, Steve, we were agreeing that there's a sort of slight sort of point where things are really starting to progress. The data is, you know, it's data, and having the use cases and saying, you know, from a medical perspective, outcomes were 5% better based on this, that, and the other. There's a really good study, Steve, that you've probably seen, which I think Oculus commissioned, but it was with Imperial College ran it, and they basically they trained medical students half in VR, half traditional methods, and then they watched them conduct an operation using prosthetics. And the students have been trained using VR, needed no intervention from an attendee to help them, whereas 83% of those who trained in normal methods needed some sort of help. And those sorts of that data, which there isn't enough of, is priceless, you know, because then it takes it away from, yeah, I feel I'm better equipped to do my job because you've just tried some cool tech, to 0% of those trained in VR needed assistance. So those, you know, we have a big project with Shell. They're rolling out 8 health and safety modules. The data from that is going to take a long time, not only to develop, but also to get permission to share it. So there's lots of data out there, but it's just actually getting into the public domain. And that's going to fast forward the whole immersive tech sector quicker than anything anyone else will be able to do.
Okay, Jade, thank you very much for that. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes left. We've still got a few questions to answer. So I'm going to roll a few of these together now. And I'm going to ask Ross if he would just share his thoughts on the opportunities and challenges that are likely to be either faced by immersive technologies or posed to business over the next 5 years.
Yes, I think yes, there obviously are a lot of opportunities coming up. I think one of the interesting areas is multi-users in the VR environment, being able to work together with people in different places. We've been working on a project with architects, and I mean, there's a few of these around now, but being able to have an architect in New York, London, wherever, be standing in the same sort of location and being able to sit inside property which has only been on plans, and being able to move things around and make adjustments and working with clients. And also, I'd say with meetings as well, I think multi-user experiences will be a big opportunity. I know it's been mentioned before, but yeah, the 5G and that, and making, sort of mobile, making, it's also, I think there is a issue with VR at the moment. You got different types of VR. You got tethered VR, where you need quite powerful computers. Then you got sort of mobile VR, where that's obviously can be, a lot more people can access that straight away. So I think that the quality of everything, we're optimizing VR apps and such like, the quality of the apps will improve substantially, over the coming years. And also going back to what James and Rohit were saying about AI, that's going to be a really big opportunity as well. I think that's going to have big changes for VR. In the game engines we're working in, it already implements AI in there. And so much of this is driven by the game engines and the gaming sort of sector. And the game's using a lot of AI already, so it doesn't take that much to be able to implement that in VR and being more responsive to people and their environments. I think there's a lot of sort of, with the investment, and I see a lot of people sort of investing a lot of money into it, but it's getting commercial viable products out there. I mean, someone told me recently with investors, but there's a lot of really clever stuff which is being made out there, but a lot of it is, they're finding it hard to find applications for it in the marketplace. I think there's quite a lot of challenges out there. Obviously, with the VR, it's getting, it does rely on headsets, so people having access to that, or if you're location based, then it's a matter of obviously people having to go to that place as well.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Ross. As we're closing in on the finish time for this webinar, I just want to go over to Steve, because Steve's been responsible for organising quite a lot of meetup events in London on the subject of virtual reality and augmented reality. So, Steve, where would you advise people to look if they wanted to learn more about immersive technologies?
Oh, thanks, David. You actually set it up for me. Augmenting Reality is my meetup group. If you Google that, you'll get straight to us. We've got nearly 7,000 members in the group already, which is fantastic, and we're getting more and more every day. When we started off, we started off with about 9 members. That was 7 years ago. So you can see how things are progressing. It's becoming more and more of an interesting space for people. So if you want to find out more about what's happening in augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, as I say, Google Augmenting Reality Meetup, and you'll see where we are. We meet regularly at Microsoft Reactor, actually in Shoreditch. So anybody's welcome. The meetups are totally free because we're trying to generate interest in immersive technologies and everything to do with that, and whether that's AI or haptics, we also include that as well. So everybody's welcome. As I say, that also you can look at the work that Immerse UK and Digital Catapult are doing in this area to find out more about what's happening and how fast this new technology is actually going to be accelerating over the next few years.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Steve. And of course, hopefully this is only the first of a webinar on the subject of immersive technologies, and in a very real sense, webinars provide some kind of an immersive experience that allows people to communicate certainly over distances, and to be able to share their knowledge and experience without moving from from their desk. So maybe as well as the physical events that you're running, and you must always remember that meeting people physically has a lot of advantages over meeting virtually. But I think virtual meetings, virtual conferences and webinars, I think will be increasingly important in helping to share understanding and to further advance the development in immersive technology. I'm going to move over to Rohit now for the final question before we go to Q&A. And Rohit, what's your vision of the future of immersive technologies, and how do you think it's going to shape business and society in the future?
It's quite a big question, really. I think what we're going to see is a lot more of the kind of applications that Steve and James in particular have been talking about, fairly industrial applications, fairly operational applications, whether it's in training, whether it's in maintenance. I think organizations are going to begin to see that this is actually an incredibly efficient way of doing things, and then scaling to the kind of applications, again, we talked about, like architects meeting or engineers meeting. And I think the current kind of coronavirus issue is going to accelerate that, where people are saying, look, I can't travel, I don't want my project to slow down, I need to connect still with my partners, and rather than all of us flying into Dubai, can we do this virtually? Can we, and yes, we can do a video conference, but if we can actually have the physical artifacts we're talking about, or the room we're creating, or the building we're building, as a place where, that we can visit virtually, that changes it quite dramatically. I also think there's another thing that's going to benefit us here, which is that because of the coronavirus, a lot of organizations are going to see their environmental footprint decline quite dramatically. And that'll be monitored quite closely. And so they'll actually be saying, how do we avoid going back to really stepping things up again? And that's where the technology starts to step in and says, to say, actually, we can do a lot of what you would have done by flying using these virtual environments, and you can reuse them and you can use them for training. So you're going to have multiple benefits from creating that virtual rendering of the building that you were creating. I think the area obviously that has the massive potential payoff is when you can bring this into next level gaming and you create true augmented, virtual, or mixed reality gaming experiences, multiplayer experiences where individuals can start to also create part of the experience, almost home code and inject something in. That's when you start to get something really interesting, a whole new ecosystem emerging, potentially a new economic model as well about how all the players within that start to participate and get rewarded for adding stuff in. You might look at microgrids in electricity as one of the models that, how that might work. But there are a lot of possibilities that come when you do this. And there are a lot of people coming through who really don't want to travel anymore, who want to be able to do everything virtually, and who want the power that this technology gives them that you can't, you can't give them those facilities any other way. So I think there's some very exciting applications there, both, if you like, in a work setting, but the really high potential one is when we start to bring this to the mass market and start to give people the ability to create their own elements of the experience.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Rohit. As you say, it's a very exciting world that we live in, and I have to reflect on the fact that many years ago I used to work for British Telecom, and after I left British Telecom I went to IBM, and this would be in the 1980s, 1990s, and video conferencing was going to be the big thing, and that was going to mean that none of us would travel anymore, because we'd be able to communicate with each other through video conferencing. and I still remember seeing loads of video conferencing equipment stacked away in cupboards unused many years later. But now, as we've got technologies like 5G, we've got truly immersive virtual reality headsets, which don't have to be connected to a PC, improved communications. All of these enabling technologies will allow us to do so much more in the future and really raise the bar. I'm going to give each of our panelists an opportunity just to say a few final words in conclusion. We have no open questions, so it looks like the questions have been dealt with. So, Ross, I'm going to start with you and just ask you to share your final thoughts.
Yes, no, it's been a really interesting hour. Yeah, I think there is just so much. It is such a new, still a beginning point. I think it's almost quite similar to where smartphones were when they first came in. Is that I think you really couldn't see the potential of how they would become part of our daily life and where they would actually fit in. And I mean, I use my phone for so much, and it's kind of scary how much we depend on it. I think the development will be something along that line. It will become part of. We've come across it in business, for entertainment, and yes, so many different points.
Almost every aspect of life, you might say. Okay, James, what would you say in conclusion? Just a few words.
I mean, I would say I don't think we're at the start of the journey. I think we're a little way through, and I think the market is waking up to the potential for immersive technology, particularly within the enterprise space. I think from a consumer perspective as well, they're starting to see where particularly sort of augmented reality, mixed reality can fit. I think virtual reality in the consumer space will stay pretty much in a gaming niche for a little bit of time yet. So I don't think we're going to have headsets in every home for a reasonable amount of time until they become much cheaper. And I would say where we'll get to, perhaps back to a point I think Rohit made, is we'll have, looking way ahead, we'll have one headset which in effect flips between VR and MR and looks to a point where you're happy to wear it. But that's probably 20 odd years off, but that's where we'll get to.
Okay, thanks very much for that, James. I'm trying to conjure up some images of what that headset might look like. So now, Rohit, as a futurist, what would you like to say about what can we look forward to in the future as far as immersive technologies are concerned?
I think a lot's been covered. In the immediate future, it'll be fascinating to see what the business impact of coronavirus is on people's budgets, and whether declining budgets actually accelerates the use of immersive technologies in training applications because it works out cheaper than the other alternatives. Longer term, really interested to see how we can bring the price down, to take it to the commercial market, and how do we create the ability for people to create real-time immersive experiences themselves as they can do now with a video camera? How do we get to that point where the technology, or simple example, you remember that tunnel problem in Thailand where the football team were trapped? What if those divers going through could have had the ability to capture and create an entire VR experience for the other divers coming through of exactly what the tunnel system looked like, and been able to train people far more in VR before they went through that? That might have speeded up the whole process and allowed for, they still had a fantastic outcome, but I think in those kind of emergency situations as well, VR could start to play a much bigger role as the technology gets smarter and smarter.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And Steve, what would you like to say about the future of AR and VR from your perspective?
I think everybody's actually sort of put things very eloquently. I think that the short term, the next 5 years, AR and VR is going to become more and more widely used. It's a case of getting better applications, but also the price points of the headsets and the quality of the headsets, also the quality of the applications will help. But in 10 years' time, I think we'll look back on this and exactly like we look back on smartphones now. It's a very good analogy that we will have forgotten what it was like not to have VR, and we will have forgotten what it was like not to have AR as part of our lives. And if we're going to go really far into the future of headsets is actually probably going to be in implants or contact lenses. If you want to go real science fiction, that's on the agenda. How soon that's going to happen, it's anybody's guess. But it's certainly going to be very exciting times in immersive technology from now on.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Steve. And thank you very much to all of our panelists. You've done a great job, and I thank you for giving up your time this afternoon. Just in conclusion, from my point of view, I think a lot of people don't realize just how much you can already do with existing technology. And I'd like to cite just a simple example. As I'm of pensionable age, I'm lucky enough to go to a local village hall for lunch about once a month. And I gather together with a lot of older people like myself. And on one occasion last year, when I was asked to give a talk about my travels and about the kind of work that I do, I was using a 360-degree camera in this village hall, connected to the internet with the 4G. And I said to my older companions, what would it be like if you could have one of your relations experience being sat in the same room as you and listening to this presentation and sharing it with you? And they said, well, it would be wonderful. And I said, well, that's what's actually happening now, because I was live streaming with a consumer 360-degree camera, and we were actually being watched in Brazil, Thailand, Lithuania, as well as in the UK. And that was 18 months ago. So we are really not just not at the start of the journey, but I think we are some way through it, as James has said. Thank you very much for those of you who've joined us today as participants. And thank you very much to all our panelists. And I look forward to hopefully meeting you again in future IORMA